Janine, welcome to Austin Next.
Thank you, Jason. It's so good to be here.
All right, we'll get into probably all the connections and how I found out all about Edge City and everything, but let's kind of start off with the big picture here. What is Edge City, and what do you mean by society incubator? It's a very,
Yeah,
grandiose term
gr-
there.
great place to start, Jason. So this kind of all came about. Like, let's dive back into like the problem we're trying to solve here. Ultimately, when you look at things like tech is moving so fast right now, yet society isn't. Like the systems that shape our time, the institutions we have, the sort of social norms that we practice day to day, the governance structures, like they were made for a prior world, and where we're going is changing rapidly. So they're not really able to, meet the opportunities and challenges of the current moment. And there's this change that we're seeing from like the technological breakthroughs in AI, in just even like education, in compute, and just across the board. Look at crypto. Look at all of these different like brain-computer interfaces. Like things are going to change so much, and we sort of need a space to test what those changes look like. So when we think about, why a society incubator and where it started, it was just kind of this idea of like, can we create a small pocket for a long enough time period where hundreds of people live together and share ideas around tech, science, and society to build and test out new concepts, and almost incubate what could work or what might not end up working in just like greater cities around the world. So that whole concept got started 2 years ago, actually, with Vitalik Buterin, who had the original idea to just like test out, what does it look like to bring together 200 people for 2 months in a random small walkable town. And we built that with him, and from that decided to sort of create this broader movement of pop-up villages, and Edge City was born out of that. And when we thought about it, it was like, well, do we want to just build one permanent new space, or do we actually want to keep creating these almost like museums of the future, where it's like 1 month of people living and testing things together and accelerating what they're building much, much faster because of having one another in close proximity, having a shared calendar, and many like working spaces that people can run workshops, where they can do a hackathon over the weekend, where they can share ideas over breakfast or lunch. And that has sort of got us to where we are with Edge City. And we've done three of these so far, where they're month-long gatherings. We've done them around the world because we believe that if we're trying to shift social norms and test out new ideas for society, we can't just do that in one country. Multiple cultures need to frame that. So we've done one in Turkey, one in Healdsburg, California, and one in Thailand, in Chiang Mai. And with that, each one was a full month with this concept of like bring together 200 people, so above Dunbar's number, of folks that are there the whole time, as well as each week bringing in hundreds of other people. So, we had over the course of our time in Healdsburg, 1,300 people come through. Some just came for the weekend, some came for a whole week, some for the whole month, where we built something really special together, where, each week was themed around some frontier field, whether it was biotech and health, or AI and neurotech, or kind of cryptography and what that means for the future. There was sort of like it was an explosion of almost like unconferences that happened over the course of the month. And we've done that now in all those spaces, and plan to continue these temporary pop-ups for now, with the idea that over time we might create more permanent spaces once the concept is sort of like settled with people.
So when you have technological hackathons, depending on the type of tech, you obviously can do that really fast. And I like the idea when you're thinking about essentially iterating and building social technology, you understand that needs to be longer, which you have in these kind of month-long, um, experiments. But I'm wondering then, is that even long enough because of the kinds of feedback loops that you probably need to have, and understanding where those, I don't know, I was going to say edge cases, no pun not intended, but understanding like where, you know, whether it be, and I'm not in the camp where like AI is going to take all the jobs or anything like that, but understanding things of where you have those second, and some of the things we were talking about like before, sort of like, second order effects, third order effects, and it feels like when having technology seep into a ecosystem, a society, it takes time to see what those knock-on effects are, and then having the social technology to think about them. I mean, this is the problem, right? Is that the social technology moves so slowly, right? And the technology moves so quickly. So how are you either speeding that up, that kind of iterative cycle, or is that just a known problem you're having to deal with?
So I think to the point of like length of time, like we don't know yet, right? Like we've done 2 years of these experiments. My sense is out when and our hope is that we're actually going to shift towards having more permanent spaces over time. But getting people to move is no small feat. And getting people to adopt new ways of spending time is also no small feat. It's kind of like the idea of a vacation is a lot easier than the idea of moving to an entirely new place and buying a new house and just kind of everything that goes into that. So, starting with these temporary spaces, that what we have seen, no matter what, is that having pressure to get something done over a shorter period of time versus like you've just got like infinite time to build the idea or the concept, and some people just like never actually get there. That pressure time is super valuable. Now, whether that ends up being 3 months and we decide like, 3 months is a better time period than 1 month for that, that is yet to be seen. And when we start actually building towards permanent hubs, which sort of I haven't quite mentioned yet, but we as Edge are partnering with a lot of new town projects, which
Mm-hmm.
is kind of, it wasn't part of the original strategy, but it has worked out really well so far. One of them is Esmeralda, which is going to be a new town north of Healdsburg. So it's about 15 minutes north, built by Devin Zugel, who she's an incredible visionary and entrepreneur that really wants to build like a healthy, walkable, sort of learning forward village that has the energy of a city. And we're just helping almost like build towards that concept by building the culture and the idea around it ahead of time. So that will be a permanent space at some point that we're working with. And there'll be a whole host of new challenges of like, how do you actually get people to have that same focused energy that they have in the 1 month experiment? Or how do you get them to like work on the idea immediately versus wait months to do so? So what we're seeing now is that these shorter time periods, it's kind of like a college campus for multiple generations,
Mm.
where think about like a semester. Like, some people will slack out for the first like 2 weeks, and then it gets to like the last 3 weeks of term, and they're like, oh my gosh, I need to like produce something and I need to work on something. And we're almost like creating that pressured space, but instead of it just being for a like, 4 year bandwidth or a 1 year time period for people all of the same age, we're doing it much more in a like build something that you're going to use versus just like spend time learning in the space.
We talk about a little bit kind of the abstract. Can you walk me through something that's come out of one of the early ones and kind of a success story, or at least a
Yeah,
something that's happened? You can say like this is where we've built the social technology coming out of this.
yeah. So a really great project, or two good projects, which are both in the cryptography space that are more focused on like privacy preserving tooling. So in ZK technology, one is called ZooPass with this group 0x Park. They're kind of like very out there in their thinking, and they have built a digital identity system that's built on zero knowledge proofs. And it just means that, it's fully encrypted on the back end. And it's kind of like this revolutionary idea of like digitizing identity in a way that is like fully provable. And they have now scaled and been used at like multi-thousand person conferences. And the hope is actually they're starting to have conversations with different governments around the world, much like smaller governments. But it's like interesting to see that that technology is going somewhere. And it was kind of the first of its kind that they built. Another group is also in the cryptography space called Cursive Labs, and they've been focused on FHE encryption. So it's like homomorphic encryption. That is, you don't worry about all the terms,
I was going
but
to
the
say
idea
not
is
in the
like,
crypto space, so not quite sure what that means. Yeah.
no worries at all. And this isn't crypto. This is sort of zero knowledge.
Okay.
And the idea there is having social technology that's actually like social media, but without having your information stored in a central server, and instead making connections between people based on encryption, which is a very interesting concept. So those are two on more of the like very technical niche frontier fields. And then something that is interesting that we have seen is because of having multidisciplinary groups in edge cities, like we've got everything from neurotech to people in AI to people in education and whatnot. One workshop that really comes to mind is we had a workshop at Edge Esmeralda that was with a whole bunch of people in the neurotech space. But instead of having just people who were like working on neurotech, there were some biologists and there was some physicists and there was someone that was working on sort of like the biology of plants and not even looking sort of like at anything to do with the brain. And that workshop alone kind of catalyzed three different companies that have come out of it. That just that moment in time, the group of people that were there, the exposure to other events that were happening that weekend, because there was also a hard tech weekend that was going on, as well as a something that Nans Ransahoff was doing from Stripe Climate. And all of that together and the people that were kind of at those different events getting to meet just in the sort of village-like environment sparked these projects that might not have happened otherwise. So I think seeing that happen in the environment has been super fun. And then the
So what?
last
Well,
two.
I want to stop for a second though. Some what you're describing right now is the amazing creative collisions of agglomeration effects. You put all these kind of smart people together; they're bouncing ideas. Where do you see, just from the descriptions, and obviously maybe if you go the next layer down, I the almost the social technology part of it, the pieces that aren't moving so quickly, right? Our governance, the way we're thinking about it. I mean, what I see so often, especially I feel like now, where in the last whatever 20 years, you can figure out whatever the right time frame is, everything has been about just technological iteration, and that was great, and we could just say I can swap this out for X and Y, and you do that. When you start to have 100x improvement, 1000x improvement, the nature of the innovation changes what happens, right? Like I'm watching Jason Carmen's like space movie right now, right? And how SpaceX is bringing down of the cost of flight. Like now, the entire space economy is changing. It's not merely just I have a better technology, but our entire relationship with space changes. And that's what I see, as you said, like these when we have whatever, like institute universities. We talked about education early, right? Like universities that were built in starting in whatever the 1600s and then kind of moving forward, and now you have AI. You're like, okay, the things don't kind of mesh up in the same manner that they did before. So how have you been seeing the that part of the equation coming in with the technology side?
Yeah, such a good question. When I look at that, like one thing to actually focus on is education. And I think this is a place where, like, how we've built the education system, both primary and tertiary education, are institutions of a totally different era. Like, to the point, it's like AI is changing learning so drastically. And what we're also seeing is it's like, kids going to school, sitting in a classroom, learning about what they're learning now. Firstly, we're like, is this even relevant for
Right.
the future? And secondly, it's like, well, we've actually learned about what is good in education, like one-on-one tutoring dramatically increases how well a kid does. The other thing that has proven to show like incredible sort of like genius in some capacity is kids being exposed to many different adults. And when we actually talk about like social innovation being done, Age just decided, we wanted to be multi-generational. I was like, you can't build towards like a new societal model without actually having all of the different elements of that. So in the past few that we have done, the one that we did in Healdsburg, Edge Esmeralda, and what we did in Thailand, Edge Ceylana, we had over 80 kids that came to Healdsburg, and we had 30 kids that came to Thailand. And what was amazing to see was families participate in Edge City, where kids were just going to the workshops with their parents, and they were going to dinner and meeting, 10 other adults that were there that like they wouldn't have gotten to learn from otherwise. And some adults like put on the schedule different lessons that they wanted to teach kids. Or we had the kids saw that there was a demo day that was happening every week for some of the adults, and they were like, wait, we want to do a demo day. So the kids started doing demo days and shared it with many of the adults and got feedback. And that sort of like bi-directional learning where it was just much more synergistic of like, oh, kids are just part of things, and that's how, they're going to learn in some capacity, or families are able to participate. Like moms were so thankful because they could just be in sort of this environment where they got to socialize and also at the same time see their kids learning. We went from one kid arrived, she was a 2-year-old who came at the very beginning of Edge Esmeralda and literally at every single turn saw a stranger and just screamed shy. 2 weeks in, she was going around dinners with popsicles and being like, share, share, Winnie, share. And it's just so cool to see this like socialization that this kid went through. So that's actually a social innovation, I would
Mm-hmm.
say, that has come out of Edge City. The other would be on the health side. Seeing how, people live in cities today, like health is not the default. It is a luxury for so many, and it is hard work. Like living in a healthy home, making sure you have healthy water, making sure that you're not, eating seed oils, making sure that you have organic food, working out on a daily basis instead of just driving everywhere. Like it's hard work to actually be healthy. And something that we've been focused on is like, what does it look like if we just build a healthy environment by default, where we have a shared meal on a daily basis that like we celebrated being, organic, locally sourced, no seed oils, and people actually just get to meet a whole bunch of other people while having that meal. We've got a bunch of workout instructors that we'll bring in, as well as a running club, and we've got games every Saturday. And this whole kind of just like idea of like, what does it actually look like to just by default have more of a like healthy, almost like close-knit community environment. We also had an app that was tracking people's sleep scores and kind of having people compete against one another, as well as people like tracking having a CGM and tracking sort of their glucose intake.
I swear, all the people who track the sleep scores and who have these things don't have children. As someone
No.
who had kids come in last night, I'm like I can sleep and do everything perfect, and if someone comes in at 2 a.m. saying like I want to go, I can't sleep, and
What are you going to do?
yes, and then the best line was from my wife last night when my daughter came in. She's like, I can't sleep. She's like, why are you telling me? They have to share it with us. So like the Aura Ring or any of these things, I get it. It makes perfect sense. I am 100% in agreement of a great sleep. I don't know how to do it in this case.
you you are calling out a problem that's definitely a hard one to solve. And we'll have to we should do a bit of a comparison at our next edge of families versus, and parents versus those without parents in the sleep, and like see how people score against one another. But I think more of it is like we're still in the early stages, I would say, of like, what does it actually take towards building a healthy city and healthy like society by default? And I think like we've done like the things that people are like, okay, check on the surface level, healthy meals, workouts, and like changing. We even like change light bulbs in the place that we go so that they're circadian rhythm light
Mm.
bulbs and aren't LEDs that are flashing at folks. But I think there's so much more that we need to unpack to figure out like, okay, where are we missing the mark in terms of as a society on like making healthy environments by default versus making them, really hard and like time consuming to create. Like I love Brian Johnson and I think he's done an amazing job of putting out ideas about, what does it actually take
It's a
to be
lot of
super,
work.
super healthy. And
Yeah.
it's a lot of work. Like, how can we take a lot of that research and keep pushing the boundaries of like, what does it look like to make default healthy environments that we're just happy to be in?
It's a combination of I think a lot of the things, right? And so uh, one is how do you, to your point, how do you make you can use the default. The word I've used a lot is like invisible. Like so much of our technology is invisible. Like you and I are able to talk and do these things, and I click a button, it works. I don't even know how the technology is working. I'm just making sure that it works. And the same thing with our phones and all this kind of stuff. And health is one of the few things that really doesn't work that way. Like actually, after we finish recording this, I'm gonna have to go work out. But like and it's not that we shouldn't be going and working out, but health is one of the few things that it really is even if you're not going like the Brian Johnson end of the spectrum, it's just still a lot. Like I got to be monitoring everything I'm eating. I have to be working out on this kind of constant basis. And so one of the questions is like, yeah, how do you make more of that, either decreasing the behavior change required or making
Yeah,
those things more invisible? One is, to your point, is there a way to make the environment just more conducive? One, I think, is there a technological approach, like a concept that I was on a podcast, and I know it's come up on this podcast a number of times. We were talking about with like AI agents and the idea of like, can my agent go out to the restaurant that I have reservations at and alter the menu, not in a way that is actually negative for the restaurant, but like anything from I'm allergic to X, Y, and Z, so just remove those things from the menu so I don't see them, to hey, I'm paleo, I'm whatever, like I'm active in this way, I want more protein, so those things are highlighted. It just makes my decisions easier because it's already done versus okay, I got to look at this, I got to ask these 15 questions, I have to figure out, what's the lower calorie, higher calorie, whatever it may be. And then there are those other things like, I've gotten into debates with people about this. Like I'm pro, like, yes, eat right, lose weight, exercise, I think are great things. We've also been saying those things for a long time, and it's obviously not that simple. So I'm definitely fine with interventions like Ozempic and those kinds of things, especially as they're getting better and better, because we're on like the third version of that. And I know when there's different side effects and of them, but when you have that type of opportunity on the board, like we can adjust for those, and the sixth version of Ozempic is going to be something interesting. But like it can be like, hey, go do this and exercise and do the things that we've been telling you to do forever, or maybe the things that we can help you do to kind of catalyze forward. So I think it's tough. There's no simple answer at the moment, but like I think we're in some places now with technology and those kind of 1000x, and then what's the social technology that comes on top of it to really change what's possible.
yeah, and I think that to that, I might have a different perspective on Ozempic,
Yeah, that's
but
fine.
I think we don't necessarily need to go into that now. But I think that there's like, to me, what I really enjoyed about building Edge and the concept of social technology took me a while to like really think about, of like, okay, what is a social technology? Like, is eating healthy a social technology? Is having seeing people, like seeing more than 20 people a day, is that a social technology? Like what is it? And still yet to be like fully defined. But what we're trying to do is like look at like, where are there problems where people are like, man, it's taking me so much time or it's so expensive to be X. Like, having a kid is a ton of time. It's really expensive. And you're like, okay, do I just like lose my life to having a child? And like, that should not be how it feels. It should be like, oh my gosh, I'm super excited to have a kid. I can like still live, I will live an even more full life by having a kid than not. And health is the same. It's like it shouldn't be a chore to be healthy. And I think the approach of like I appreciate trackers as we have them today, and how they're helping keep us accountable in some way. But it feels more like it's almost like a you're chained to, or sort of like handcuffed, versus just by default you've got a protocol around you that works. So there's almost like these social protocols that we're
Yeah, I
trying
think
to do.
trackers are the great example of where I think we are missing a step in the technological evolution of some of this stuff, because I'll never forget this. This was like 10 years ago or something, when Apple Watches were first coming out. And one of my good friends, ER doc, kind of came and it's like, I've got this Apple Watch. It's great. It tracks my, heart rate. And I was like, awesome. What are you going to do with that? Like, how
Yeah,
are you actually going to implement that? And so a lot of these trackers that I've seen, it's like, I give you a score, I give you a number. And you know the percentage number of people who are actually going to, with just a score alone, and just that data point, are going to actually make change is very, very low. And it's always, whether it be anything from consumer devices to even like healthcare devices, of like, here's remote monitoring, we've got this score and that, like, it's what's the insight, what's the action that goes along with it, what's that next level of technology beyond just the tracker. I think that's one of the reasons we've seen so many of these consumer health devices that are trackers. It never really completely broken through beyond kind of that, like, quantitative self 2%, whatever percentage that you want, because is we just like, it doesn't make it invisible. It actually makes it more visible and more work. And they never go the next step of saying, now that we have this information, I'm going to make it less work.
totally. Like invisible protocols, I think are just like so awesome to look at when it comes to technology
I
and
love
like
that phrase. I haven't
social
heard that phrase before. I
technology.
like that. Invisible protocols. That's fantastic. Yes.
And think about it in terms of like no one thinks today about like, oh my gosh, how am I going to get from A to B? Like if you're trying to travel to someone's house 20 miles ago, like you're not like, or 20 miles away, you're not like, oh gosh, I'm going to have to spend like 45 minutes thinking about like, what is the route? How am I going to get there? It's like, we have just built a protocol that works for navigation,
Yep.
right? So it's like, how do we do that for education? How do we do that for being parents? How do we do that for health? How do we do that for like building projects and companies and like where we go? Like, I think there's still just so much to work on. And it's been really fun kind of shaking up those systems a bit at Edge City, where it's like you're in a space where it's like bets are off, like you have full agency to test out new ideas.
Yeah. I love it. And it's the combination of invisible protocols plus agency. Because if it's
Yeah,
invisible protocols without agency, then you're running on rails that other people are building for you. But
totally.
if you build having the agency and using this technology, whatever the technology is, to then build the invisible protocols for yourself that then you run on. So then you've made your life easier, but it's making your life easier in the way that you want to make it easier. And you're kind of putting your, you know, expanding your agency on the world, rather than the world or others putting their agency on you.
Totally. Like I think there's just so many areas to think about this. And another big reason we've focused on building Edge City is like the social protocols around people's people's happiness, and sort of like depression and anxiety are like higher than they have ever been. And you're like, what the heck is going on? Like we have everything at our disposal. And the biggest solve that we have seen is like people actually being around like healthy environments of something where they feel like they've got a purpose, and many people around that they can socialize with, where they feel like there's shared values, like familiarity in some capacity. Like it just skyrockets how happy people are. And we've seen that at Edge. Like people have loved their time in these spaces. And we've got this one person who I just think is like a perfect example of someone who would live in the more the idea of what an Edge City is. Like the idea of sort of living on the edge of what's normal, where everything is adopted, sooner than elsewhere, and it just feels like that is the norm. We've got this one guy, Mike Johnson, who has come to everything so far, and is totally a part of just the whole fabric of the experience, who's focused on looking at like what is the enlightenment blueprint, and how do we actually build a philosophy and science around enlightenment where every human in the world can just generally feel enlightened at all times. And like it's something that he is tracking after, and he finds Edge City to be this amazing place to study, because he's like, people are just happier and healthier here because they have agency, because there are systems that can be like rethought and reimagined, and then taken elsewhere after the fact. But it's been cool seeing this idea of like, well, is the model of like therapy that we have today, one-on-one therapy, that we just like we thought was going to be the solve, right? We were like, if you just go to a therapist, you will cure your depression, and that hasn't quite worked. But we're not like
That's an
sitting there being like,
understatement, saying it's
okay,
not quite worked.
just saying like, okay, that wasn't a system that we've built a massive industry around, that needs to be rethought, right? And like, how do we build towards that? And where are the spaces that we can build towards that? So we're just hopeful we can create kind of these environments where rethinking these systems that haven't worked for like human flourishing can be done.
Edge City in Austin, it's coming up uh, March 2nd through the 7th. So what's different? What's the same? How would you describe Edge City Austin?
Well, I'm very excited for this one because Austin is my hometown. I was about to say because Edge City is my hometown, um, because Austin
Right,
is my
probably feels that
hometown,
way at this point,
and
yes.
it really does actually. It's fun saying that, but I really want to sort of capitalize on the amazing things that are happening in Austin. Like I think there is like so much talent and potential in the city to be a US city that dominates in the next while. There's so much happening in the hard tech scene. There's a lot happening in the health and biotech scene. Neurotech, there's a whole bunch of stuff happening here. There's like very strong conscious communities. There is a lot happening in even the hospitality and sort of like new co-working and membership club space. Like there's just a lot going on that I wanted to shine a spotlight on and say, hey, there's stuff happening in all of these different industries in the city. How can we use this opportunity to bring everyone together as one big ecosystem that can start thinking about like ways to play off one another and actually help put Austin on the map in a major way in the next 5 years to decade. So I know there's a lot of other amazing initiatives going on in Austin, and it's just been so fun getting to see those and collaborate with some of the folks from those initiatives, like what's happening with UATX, what Brendan McCord and Lauren are doing with Cosmos Institute, some of the stuff that Arena Hall is working on, Jack Zimmerman is working on with the Well, and a new project called the Monroe Project. Like there's a lot happening here that I would love to see and support and like catalyze those initiatives. So we're not doing a full month Edge City here. We're only doing a week because South by in itself is kind of just a continuation of what we'll be doing. So it's almost like 2 weeks of activity of learning and building and creating connections. So it'll be March 2nd till 7th, and each day we're working around a different theme. So we'll have a shared calendar that everyone can add to, but we are seeding it with different workshops and salons that are happening every evening. So it's like post work, come and learn about and engage in a topic, as well as then like hang out after. And then for those that can work remotely, coming in co-working during the day. And from a health angle, the mornings, we're going to have Diana Wilcox, who's one of my favorite workout instructors in town, do workouts. We'll do some folks are coming in and doing like somatic breath work. Someone else is working on kin stretching, like helping people just like realign their bodies. So we've got a whole bunch of stuff on the health side going on in the morning, co-working during the day, and then these awesome workshops every evening. And you will see on the program, we'll put a lot more out in terms of what is happening each day with a shared calendar next week. But Sunday is like technology for human flourishing as the focus. There will be lightning talks happening on one end, and then workshops that are actually more around like human connection and people getting to know one another to start off the week. That's Sunday. Monday's health and biotech. So we'll have, of course, a lot happening in the morning in that area, and then that evening, themed learning around the topic. On Tuesday, we've got embodied AI. So folks like Brendan McCord is going to be doing something on AI and just kind of thinking about like how do we actually use it for good. We've got folks that run this like Austin salon that are doing a talk after about just like where can you actually apply AI to make a difference in the world. So that's going to be a great day. And that evening, we're actually going to get a whole bunch of artists and musicians from in town to have an open mic night and sort of a show and tell art exhibit. So that evening will just be really special.
We should. I really do think that like Austin should be owning the intersection of AI and art. Like
Totally.
it's happening in pockets in different things, but I really think that I know there's some pushback that I've been seeing, obviously that you see this, and it's funny because in some way we saw it with the photographs, we saw it with TV, like any new medium kind of comes along, and is it like you can't do this is ruining this, that, or the other thing. And but I was at an AI art exhibit here a little while ago, and like I think we have the opportunity to have people kind of really lean in here, and I think it'll be pretty amazing.
Yeah, and I would love to see, many more people in this field join Edge. For one sort of anecdote is we have had an art residency for the past two Edge events that we've done. So we had about 15 artists out in Chiang Mai with us for the whole time because art is such an important element to document culture of a time, right? And like as I kind of mentioned, Edge is almost like these like it's like a museum of the future and having the art that matches it. So we've got people walking around in VR headsets that are making art, and then we've got anyone can contribute to a piece. We've got other people that are like mapping the experiences that are happening day to day. And it's just been really cool collecting that artwork as a part of these like very intense, like future focused environments. And I think AI and art has such a incredible future, and what's happening with VR and like transitioning from like clunky goggles to like what we'll get to BCIs and have sort of these like non-invasive BCIs on our head and then maybe invasive, who knows. But like it's a whole realm that I'm super excited to see exist. And I think Austin can be such a hub for that because we do have a very creative scene, and there is this kind of area of like exploration around tech and art that has happened with South by historically. And I think that like the city could just like take that on.
Yeah,
And a big piece that like we want to see happen with Edge, sorry, I'm getting so excited here, but like
I would hope
Austin
you'd be
is like
excited.
it
Yes.
it's got like this incredible culture of like keeping Austin weird. And I think I want to see that like stay alive with the energy that happens around events like South by, right? Like I think it's very easy as something scales for it to get a little bit more stale or too corporate or whatever. And like it doesn't have to be. And I think pockets of South by have done such an amazing job of keeping it very lively and full of culture and full of like weird out there niche frontier stuff that's happening. So we really wanted to help contribute to that element. And my hope is that this is almost just like a call to action, not just for like Edge to do things on an annual basis around this, but like for more people in Austin to build around this time and to almost like have this like hub that happens with like bringing out folks and like building the ecosystem in frontier tech together and supporting one another as much as we can, of like kind of putting it on the map in a very grassroots, like keep Austin weird, the community's making it happen, versus top down people coming in and kind of saying like, okay, this is now a hard tech town and you should all do hard tech.
It yeah. So you're definitely singing my tune here, because I think that when you get to certain stages of growth, when you're at nothing and you go kind of from 0 to 1, it is a build it and they will come. You have to have, there's the one spot, you have to have kind of somebody say, we're going to do this. And you still have to get it right. You still have to have some sort of sense of the history or some sort of sense of the resources that it, you can't be like, okay, we're going to go and build, I don't know, we're going to, rockets in the middle of the ocean or something. I don't know. The point is, like, there has to be some sense that it fits, right? But I think the hardest point is, and I think Austin and a number of other cities are kind of at this kind of tipping point, is it really becomes about the Canberra, explosion moment, which is you have to get out of the way, and it's all much more about the organic growth of those things. They start to rhyme. You kind of can look out and see, like, I see, as you said, we kind of see it's hard tech means a lot of things here. Energy does, bio and health, this, the embodied AI, all those kind of things do make a lot of sense for Austin. But to have somebody stand up, especially who's not a builder and the one building these things, to say, like, we're going to go be this, even if they're saying the right this, the next sentence that they're going to say, which is, and then we need to do X, Y, and Z, is almost 99% likely wrong, because they're
Totally.
not the one building the thing. I mean, this gets back to, like, Brad Feld startup communities, right? The builders need to lead, and then the others need to be like, okay, how are we helping? How are we, I forget the word he uses, but like the supportive types of things, whether it be like the, support structures, the politicians or whatever, and allowing that. One of the things that I really like in kind of all the different pieces that you were saying that's going on in Edge City is, one, it is obviously an ecosystem, a micro ecosystem within a broader ecosystem, right? And
Totally.
I've been seeing that when I'm looking at all these ecosystems and what makes them thrive is, I think there are three types of personas that need to be there, and then having people at the intersections is really then becomes really interesting. And I think it's funny is because I think you actually, without, this is where the natural thing comes in. I think you guys have had this. So one is the obvious, is quote unquote the builders, right? This is the founders, the funders, the innovators. This is the one everybody, when you think of an innovation ecosystem, that's the one you think of, right? The people building the technology, right? I think the other, though, is the fact you have the artist in residency is, I use the word like storytellers. And this is not that, like, oh, storytellers as the skill, because everyone's like, oh, well, the builders need to be storytellers. I agree with that statement, but storytellers as a persona. And I think that kind of breaks into two zones. So one is, and you kind of said it right, you hit it, was the people like telling the narrative of the now. That can be anything from the
Yeah.
media to the artist, but then it's also becomes circular. It's also the ones inspiring the technologists and the builders, right?
Totally.
I mean, I've done a number of episodes like there's the kind of the sci-fi loop, like which came first, the
Yes.
science fiction writer writing the thing, then the innovator saying, I want to build the thing, or is it that somebody built the thing and the sci-fi writer says, well, if I take that all the way out to the edge, and so you have that consistent loop. And then the third piece is, I call it the philosophers, but it's a bit broader than that. It's anybody that's kind of expanding our thinking of the world. So anything from like scientific, researchers, academics, to actual, like, quote unquote philosophers. And I think, and then having those all interact together is really where I think some really interesting things start to happen. And really, I think that's what's held back a lot of different ecosystems, because so many of these ecosystems have just builders, right? And sometimes it's even
Yeah.
just a subset of the builders. But understanding, and that was one of the things when I moved here, was why I always question, like, from a metrics perspective, we were smaller than the narrative was out there. And I'm like, why is that? It's like, oh, because the storytellers were already here. And so
Yeah.
people get that, understood, like, oh, this is big. I mean, as I said, like, I heard about like Edge City Esmeralda before, you and I connected. And it's like, okay, so the stories are getting out there about what this was and what's going on. And I think that's such an important piece of any ecosystem that I think is overlooked too often.
Totally. I think you like nailed it actually, with just like so many people ask us is like, okay, like who is the like exact audience? And I'm like, well, it's
Yes.
broad. Right. Ha. And I think about this a lot of like it's not easy, but it's like easier to choose one demographic and just go after it. Like you can get to a like quote unquote like target market, but whether that actually leads to innovation or like catalyzing a moment that's like an aha moment is not as easy. Like it's like just bringing people together and builders in healthcare. It's like cool. You know who you're after. You know what you're getting. You know what you're attending. And we've actually seen this. We've done these like tea and talks leading up to Edge City Austin just to like get people excited and like learning about it. We started with doing a few that were just like all different industries and, you know, people from different backgrounds. And then we did a few that were just like deep in one topic area. And like you sort of miss this like real like dynamic spark when you're just in one topic area the whole time. I think it's important, like you need to have depth and breadth, like you do, but like an ecosystem needs to have a mix of all of those different players, like the builders, the philosophers, like you really, and the storytellers to like really drive a movement that inspires change. And something that we're also, you know, really focused on with Edge, and like to your point, like we have to start somewhere. So with this one, it's like we're driving a lot of it. But our hope is over time, as we sort of dive into each different place that we're doing it. So like with Austin, our hope is by doing it once here, it gives, and like really telling people they have agency during it. It gives a lot more people this concept of like, oh, I can like contribute in this different way, or like I want to bring this to the table, and like we just become a like very baseline platform for many other people to sort of like build on top of. So we're already seeing this in some way, you know, with like ATX DAO is doing a party one of the evenings.
Mm.
Monroe and the Well are doing something one of the evenings, and sort of the artists that are like, oh, we want to like as a collective do something, or the Austin Salon folks that are like, oh, we want to come and do something. Like that's the excitement and the stuff that we want to see, because all of these groups can then like feel like, oh, I have agency to carry this stuff forward. And we can see over the year, like more things happening, and next year growing, and the year after growing a little bit more. And the hope is it becomes this very like sustainable day to day ecosystem that is just like something that is just inspiring to everyone around it. And I think about a lot of, you know, I've read up a lot more of what you've been doing the past week, and I'm so amazed by just like how heads down and focused you have been about like learning about the ecosystem, shipping, you know, everything that is going on, and sharing in like such an in-depth way, and being able to sort of like give you more and different folks around you as well that are just like, oh, and like Jason's doing like the writing and the podcasting, like I'll do the events that kind of like tag team with that, or like we need to profile what we're doing and share it with like more of the audience that Jason has been bringing together, or something like that. Like I'm hopeful we're going to see a lot more of that over the coming years.
Yeah, it's been amazing. The connectivity with everybody. I mean, it's just funny, as we were talking about it before, like how many connections you and I have, and we met a week ago, and we're like, oh, we know like 15 or 20 people in common, and that's without us trying, and just how connected
Totally.
it is, and there's all these opportunities, I think, for the flywheel, as you said, kind of to keep going, and all these new things kind of spinning up. So then, do you see Edge City? Is it really just going to be that, specifically Edge City Austin, kind of that catalytic event going forward, and then hopefully the next year? Or do you see specifically things through Edge City Austin happening throughout the year, like in the best case scenario?
It's a good question. I mean, I love Austin and I want to do more in Austin. I think this is just like a starting point for Edge in Austin. I think like it'll grow over time. My hope is, you know, this is an event that people get to meet one another. There's like synergies that happen, and like actual building gets done. So it's not just like a one-off event that's a day and you meet some people and, you know, you'll meet them again. It's like there's a whole week. Some people will co-work together. Some people will hack on a project together. Some people will see how their project helps another. And my hope is like 6 months later, they're like, oh my gosh, now we're working together, and like wouldn't have happened otherwise. How I hope Edge contributes to that over the long term. Like I think we'll have more touch points in Austin over the next year. Like I'll, you know, definitely be doing things just because I'm here. And I really hope that over time there's like a full-time presence that we can have in Austin in some way, connecting the dots between different people that are already doing amazing things. So whether that looks like it's an edge city hub doing something, or it's more of like us helping people that have given back to us. Like, for example, Cosmos Institute, I'm such a big fan of. And I know that, they're
You
going
and
to
me
be doing
both.
more in Austin. And and maybe it's like they're like, hey, we need help with an event. Like, because they've gone out of their way for us, like I would love to go out of my way for them to help in some way. The same with some
So
of the like
Brendan, you are
help.
on task now. You got to do more in Austin.
Uh, there you go. And I think I've just publicly committed to helping. But I think ultimately, like I'd love us to help in major ways and be able to connect people in Austin to different ecosystems around the world. Like, the connections that we have in Healdsburg and in San Francisco, like a lot of the folks that come up to Healdsburg are in the Bay. The stuff that we're doing in the UK, the stuff that we're doing in Argentina, in South Africa, in Bhutan, like those are all great nodes that we'd love to connect the ecosystem in Austin to.
No, I love it. I think that's going to be fantastic. So I think that's a great place to always to end with the question I ask everybody. So then, Janine, what's next, Austin?
Next, Austin is going to be doing so much. But what exactly do you want me to answer there?
Well, take it anyway. I mean, what do you think's coming next for the city? What do you think's going like? It's a broad question on purpose.
Okay. Next, Austin, I think has so much in store. Like I have spent the past couple of weeks, like really digging back into the ecosystem here and getting people excited about what we're doing. But it's made me so excited about what is going on in Austin. I think there is just a catalytic moment that is happening in Austin around like American dynamism for sure. There's so much going on, and anyone that is excited to get involved in just like building for the US, like I think Austin is going to be a major hub for that. In addition,
Absolutely.
I think
Yes.
like that the health and biotech scene here is taking off, and not just because of the companies that are being built, but in terms of how people live here. Like there is a like conscious decision that a lot of people are making around eating healthy. Like Local Pastures is crushing it. There's an incredible new store that's going to be opened, a grocery store called Radius. Kevin Fisher, who's behind it, is just doing amazing work with like locally sourced everything, and like people are so excited for that. The just like people getting outside, spending time on the trails, like there's like a sense of like healthy lifestyle is really important, which I think just like builds a healthier community to do other things. And then there's so many new community projects and new city projects that are happening around Austin. Like, I think you should watch the space for new towns that are happening in the US. Like, I think Austin is actually going to be like seen as like the hub where the network effect of new towns just outside of Austin is going to happen faster than anywhere else. There's 8 new town projects happening outside of Austin, each with their own theme around a new topic.
Wow.
It's going to be
I
awesome.
knew like 2.
Yeah, it's wild now that I've started to dive in. So if you're like interested in like new society models, new ways of living, new towns, like Austin is going to be a hub for that. And I'm very excited to see what happens in that sphere. As well as like in the city, there's so much happening around like community dynamism in a way. It's like, what is a better membership model like, or what is a better membership club? What is a better co-working space? What is like a restaurant that's focused on like being someone's like community meal space, or like new home restaurant type vibe? Like that's just happening in the city, and I think with all of those different pieces coming together, it's going to be a really exciting time over the next decade.
I like it. I might steal community dynamism. That's a great term.
You got it.
Thank you so much for joining the podcast.
Thank you, Jason.
So what's next, Austin? We're glad you've joined us on this journey. Please subscribe at your favorite podcast catcher, leave us a review, and let your colleagues know about us. This will help us grow the podcast and continue bringing you unique interviews and insights. Thanks again for listening, and see you soon.